Hey guys, welcome to the Way Wednesdays. Great to be with you. If you haven't checked out our trip to Israel, well, you need to. Go to thewaycongregation.com. We're going April 2021. I just got to see Joshua Aaron last night, and he said that what he heard is that things are opening up in Israel in February, March. So by the time April comes around, we should be good. So I hope you can go with us to Israel. It's going to be a wonderful trip. Also, I want to let you know, even though this is far, far away, but Sukkot 2021, why don't you come spend it with us? Sukkot with the Way. We're going to be in beautiful Elizabeth, Colorado. We're going to be in this really pretty place that has lots of big trees, and it has frisbee golf and a baseball diamond and soccer fields and all kinds of fun stuff. It's going to be really great. And my intrepid co-host is here. Gary, how are you today?
Doing really well, thanks, Doug. It's good to see you as usual, and looking forward to tonight's study. It's always good. It's always good to open the Word.
Indeed it is. Well, hey, why don't we just jump right in? It seems like the right thing to do. So we are in Genesis chapter 25. So here we go. And then we'll chat about it.
Let's invite some people to ask questions. It always helps if you put question
Yes.
at the beginning of your question, so it's easy to identify. And let's make this really interactive tonight.
Sounds good. All right. So in Hebrew, it's ve'ele toledot. Toledot is the genealogy or generations. All right. So that's how it starts. This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. When Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan, Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Yaakov, Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. I'm going to stop right there for a moment, Gary, because I think there's some really good, juicy stuff right in there. 40 years old when he gets married. All right, so he definitely waits a while to get married, which is very significant. Also, what that tells us is that when Abraham took his son Isaac and he did the Akedah, that is the binding of Isaac. Isaac was not just a little wee lad, but he was a full-grown man at that point, and he could have defended himself if he had wanted to. And that's what makes it such a beautiful picture of the Father and Jesus the Son, that the Son willingly submitted himself to the Father. He willingly laid down his life instead of trying to fight. Jesus said, look, I could call 12 legions of angels, right? So there's about 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers in a legion. So that means upwards of 72,000 angels could have come to rescue Jesus at that moment. But he wasn't trying to fight it. He was actually willingly going to the cross, right? So, I think it's very significant. So he gets married when he's 40. I don't know if we have any indication of how old Rebekah is. She was still at her uncle's house, right? Or her house, her dad's house, right?
Yes.
No, that was her brother. So my bad.
Brother Laban, yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry. So she's at her brother's house. We don't know how old she is. She's, called a young woman, right? We don't know exactly how old that is. So she's, I don't know. Hard to say. Hard to say. But then they have to wait 20 years until they have children. 20 years, Gary. That is a long time to wait to have kids. I mean, you can see why Isaac is praying, "Oh Lord, open her womb." This is crazy, right? I mean,
that's the thing that strikes me is it's 20 years after the prayer. Mm-hmm. It's like they got married, and it's like, oh, okay, well, things aren't happening as quickly as we'd like them to, and so let's pray about this, and pray about this, and pray about this. And 20 years later, finally it happens. Yeah.
And I think it really underscores the importance of this, that this is the chosen line, right? There's a story that God is crafting in the Bible, and Abraham is a major part, Isaac is a major part, and of course Jacob is going to be a musical. Just looking at the notes here, he's going to be a major part. So thanks a lot, Darren. It's his fault. Anyway, so. I think this is really significant because we've been talking about prayer and how we do need to pray with fervency, and we would believe that God does what he does. And certainly God answered this prayer, but 20 years to wait for a child is a very long time. And I mean, I can think back in the last 20 years. I'm like, okay, a lot happened in the last 20 years. And if God had not answered my prayer within those 20 years, I might start thinking that maybe he's not faithful. Maybe he's not listening. Maybe I'm a lousy person and he doesn't love me. Something like that, right? So there has to be something that, that would just suggest that there's something else that's going on. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I'm not sure about the time frame and what else might be going on. The thing that strikes me is probably a lesson that was passed on to him by his father, because Dad had the same problem. Mom and Dad had the same problem. They waited forever. And I can imagine that they had the conversation about, and then we decided to do this on our own. And they had this whole thing with Hagar, and it didn't turn out so well. And so if you find yourself in this situation, be patient, exercise patience. And as a father and a grandfather, I really think it's so important to pass on our experiences to our children, to our grandchildren, because they're going to encounter pretty much the same stuff we run into. I remember listening to stories from my wife's dad, and the time that he went going through the Depression, and the lessons that they learned and the things that they had. I'm thinking, wow, the times we live in today are similar in a fashion. It's like, okay, some things are hard to get. We're not able to move about as freely as we would. There's really valuable lessons that we have to pass on to our kids and our grandkids. And my guess is that this was one of them. It's like, hang in there. It'll happen. God is faithful. And again, I think that's the key thing. God is faithful. He will come through. It may not look like it to you, but he will.
Amen. Yeah, amen. Just really quick, I just want to give a shout out to Fabian Zamudio from Mexico. So glad that you're here. Shirley's here. Darren is here. Brilliant Radiance. Shemin is here. Phil is here. James, Maria, Jay Jones, Jeff Warner. Awesome. Great to see you guys here. So glad you can be with us. It really makes it a lot more fun when you guys are here, when you throw in some questions. We do like taking those. And so let's forge ahead here in this wonderful text. Now, Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore, his name was called Edom. So people maybe not know, Edom is the word Adom is red. And so this is why he's called red. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, look, I'm about to die. So what is this birthright to me? Then Jacob said, swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Then thus Esau despised his birthright. Wow. As always, amazing. So what do you think is going on with this? I mean, why does Esau not care at all about this birthright?
Well, the simple answer is he is really, really hungry. Yeah.
Yes.
But I obviously he didn't value it. And I guess part of the thing that we have difficulty understanding in our modern day is the significance of the birthright, and what was really carried with the birthright. What did it actually mean? What carried with that? And was it just an inheritance? What part of the inheritance was it? You're going to be set aside as special. So, and Doug, in your studies, what do you find is what's contained in the birthright? What makes it so special?
Yeah, well, it would have been a double portion of the inheritance for sure. Secondly, this was the person who had the birthright was the person who was in control. This was the person who would lead the clan in the next generation. You might think of it as the king. The next person becomes the king, for lack of a better word. Not that it was a kingship, but that's kind of that same status. Is the person with the birthright is going to be the person who's sitting on the throne, making the choices, so to speak. So, these guys come out, right? They're twins, so they've grown up their whole lives together. They know that they're just minutes apart, so it's not like one is clearly older. They're practically equal for all practical purposes. And, for whatever reason, Esau doesn't care about this. Now, I wanted to say something about some of the extra biblical sources that are out there. Many times I hear people that refer to the book of Jasher. They think this is really a great book. They say, well, according to the book of Jasher, he was running away from Nimrod or something like that. I would strongly encourage people to stay away from the book of Jasher. There are two books of Jasher. One that was perhaps written in the 1600s, and it's a collection of Jewish traditions. And then there's another one that is called the pseudo-Jasher. So both of these are very, very, very late, right? The one that's a little bit more authentic is about 1600 AD, and the one that's clearly a forgery is around 1800. So a lot of times people read these books to fill in the blanks, and they say, well, yeah, he was hungry because, he didn't care because Nimrod was about to kill him. But we don't know that from the biblical text at all. We just don't know. So we need to really stay away from such texts. And, I do find the rabbinic traditions interesting, but sometimes I just wonder, I'm like, are they just making that up, or is there really something to that? So we're not told from the text. We can garner, just little clues. The stew is red. I mean, that's interesting. That's why he becomes known as Edom. He, like you said, he was very, very hungry. So, but whatever the reason, what we see is that he despised his birthright. That's the most important thing. Why he did it, because he was super hungry or somebody was chasing him. We don't know that. But if this is of such great significance, you would not give it up because you're hungry, right? You're like, I'd rather die than give this up, right? This is kind of like in the Middle Ages, where a man's honor, right? This whole idea of chivalry. I would sooner die than give up my honor. And this is the same the same passion here that he should have had for this, and he didn't. And, God was using this. It was prophesied that the older would serve the younger. So now we're seeing this come to pass, although we're seeing it happen where Jacob is kind of taking matters into his own hands, and he's going to pay the price for that. So when there's if somebody gives you a prophecy, they speak a prophecy over your life, great, just let it happen. Don't try to force it. Don't try to make it, because that can be something that can be somewhat disastrous. And God will work it out. We don't need to help God along. And we see this again and again where the patriarchs are trying to help God fulfill these various promises. Abraham knows that he's going to have a son. He knows that, that through this son, all the nations will be blessed. And yet it wasn't Ishmael, right? And so I get the sense here too, Jacob might have known about this birthright prophecy. He might have known that he was going to be the one that the older would serve, right? So he might have already been like, well, this is already what God said to do. And yet he tried to take matters into his own hands, and that it cost him dearly. It really cost him a lot of peace. It cost him years of good times. He ended up with not just one wife, but kind of four, essentially. So it definitely cost him. And I think we run the same risk when we try to do God's work for him.
I wonder how much plays into the fact that Esau and Jacob clearly had two different characters. Esau was kind of a more manly man out hunting and out in the fields, and Jacob, is a mild guy. He is hung out in the tents. Kind of think of him as a bookworm or something like that. And so they definitely have two different natures. But I think there's also some clues in the fact that Esau took on Canaanite wives. I don't know how that plays into it, but clearly it's not something that his mother, Rebekah, respected. I don't think his dad did either. I think that really vexed them. But why would he choose Canaanite wives? Is that part of... It's like, I don't really care that much about what mom and dad care about. I don't really care about my birthright. I'm doing my own thing here. I do think that was maybe part of it.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Gary. And I certainly Isaac and Rebekah must have been sharing with their boys the history, right? So, Abraham, your grandfather, has been walking with Yehovah all these years, and he made these promises. And then when he was old and your grandmother was way beyond her prime, God said, you're going to have a baby, and out came your dad, right? And then he said he's going to bless, our lineage. So they must have known this story. So I think what you're saying is, and I would agree with you, that Esau's like, I don't really care about this story. Maybe he thought it was fantasy. Maybe he's like, whatever. I'd rather just go after the pretty girls and not be concerned about this prophecy. I mean, whatever, prophecy, schmophecy,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Jeff has a question.
I was going to reference that. That looks like a good question, and of course aligns really well with the book that you're in the process of writing.
Yes, indeed. So Jeff asks, can you draw a connection between Esau as a hunter and Enlil the hunter? Is that a thing? Well, so it would be Nimrod or Ninurta the hunter, more so than Enlil, just for a little clarification there. But, I don't know. I mean, obviously people had to hunt back then. So even though we see that Ninurta or Nimrod was a hunter, in fact, in Genesis chapter 10, Nimrod is called the mighty hunter. So, he wasn't the only guy that went hunting. But I don't know. I mean, I do see what you're kind of getting at here is that maybe Esau was buying into that lifestyle, that mentality, into that culture. I can only speculate, Jeff. I don't know. But I think it's a valid question. I just don't have the answer. Thanks for the good question. Yeah. Cool. Another person says that the birthright is always given to the second born. I'm not sure that that's true. I mean, what Scripture says that it's supposed to go to the firstborn, and then we do see many places in Scripture where the second born or the younger is somehow avails with that birthright. But there's some particular event that makes that happen. Think about Reuben. Reuben should have gotten the birthright, but Reuben blew it, right? Reuben knew he was supposed to get the birthright. And so what did he do? He took matters into his own hands again. And then he went into his father's tent and took one of his what's the word there? One of his other wives, okay? And he was trying to show that, hey, now I'm in control. We know that Absalom did the same thing, that he took David's concubines and slept with them. And that was a way to show that, hey, now I'm the dude, right? I'm the one who is now in control. I have the authority.
I was going to say, we also see it when the blessing of Joseph's sons. And it's like, wait a minute, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. That you're supposed to be blessing the older, but the hands were crossed. So clearly, I think that the birthright was intended to go to the firstborn, but sometimes circumstances, right, or whatever, it didn't always happen that way.
Well, and in that case, Jacob says, I know, my son, I know. But, Ephraim is going to be greater. So he's looking into the future, and he's like, yeah, Manasseh is going to be great, but his little brother, greater, and so there's something about that. There really is something about that doesn't always make sense. But the birthright is supposed to go to the firstborn. But we do see many cases. I totally agree, John, that there are many cases where it goes to the secondborn or to the latter born in any event. Stan asks, is there a term for imposing our cultural context understanding this ancient culture or even current cultures? Well, I'm not quite sure your question there, Stan, but there is something known as ethnocentricity, where I take my values and I impose my culture on a previous culture. That's also known as an anachronism, where I'll take what is true today and just assume that it's true back then. So we always have to be careful. Modern interpreters are always at risk of doing that. And that's why we have to go back and we study what was happening back then. How did they understand it? That's absolutely critical for us to go back and understand how people were understanding things back then. And then we can say, okay, and how does this apply to me today? But we first need to understand how it was being used in those ancient days. Well, let's go to the next chapter, shall we, Gary? I know that time is flying, so we better keep moving.
Yeah, let's move on, because there's so much good stuff in here.
I know. There was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father, and I'll make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac dwelt in Gerar. And the men of the place asked about his wife, and he said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say, she is my wife, because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. Now it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah, his wife. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, quite obviously she's your wife. So how could you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I said, lest I die on account of her. And Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us. So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, he who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Then Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, and they had filled them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. Then Isaac departed from there and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. He called them by the names which his father had called them. Also Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. So they called the name of the well Esek, because they quarreled with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. So they called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehovot, because he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. All right, why don't we stop there? Again, there's a lot of amazing stuff just in that chunk of scripture right there. I don't know about you, but what jumps out to me is verse 6, or verse 5, excuse me, where God says that I'm going to do all this for you because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws, which is Torah, right? So, this whole idea that God gave his commandments at Mount Sinai for the first time ever, and they had never existed at all, is just patently false. I mean, we see right here that God is saying that Abraham obeyed my voice, right? He did what I told him. He kept my charge, right? The things that I said to keep, he kept. The commandments, when I commanded him to do something, he did it. My statutes and my laws and my instructions, right? So Abraham did all those things, and that was well-pleasing to God. And as a result, God could then say to Isaac, now I'm going to bless you because your father did this. When it talks about how God will not, he will remember to the third and fourth generation, right? We see that in Exodus, of those that hate him, that there's always a consequence. It can be a good consequence and a bad consequence. So if parents, especially the father, has been walking in righteousness, then there's just going to be a blessing that will carry on to the children. But if the father has been walking in disobedience and rebellion, there will be negative consequences that will be passed on to the children. I'm sorry, kids, but that's the way it goes. And I think we all can look back and say, my parents were diligent in this, they kind of missed it in this. And every generation can look back at its fathers and say, some did well, some did not so great. But when we walk in righteousness, there is a blessing for that next generation. And the whole definition of walking in righteousness is keeping God's commandments. That's the very definition of what righteousness is. You're muted there, buddy.
How about now?
Sounds good.
Okay. I do think it is amazing that it's so clear here that Abraham had apparent knowledge of not just the Torah, but the mitzvot, right? The chukot, so the statutes, the laws, all of these things, he understood them, even though they weren't presented yet at Sinai. And he walked in them, he obeyed them. And how that happened, I don't know, but he knew. And I think intrinsically, as you walk close to God, as you hear him, he makes this known to you through his Holy Spirit. But it is a really, I think, an interesting point that you bring out, that it's because of his obedience that God blesses him. And as we started out talking earlier tonight, how perhaps Abraham and Sarah shared their history and their stories and their adventures with Esau or with Isaac, and then with Esau and Jacob. We see Isaac kind of repeating one of Dad's mistakes from earlier. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I remember, Dad got in a situation like this, and this is what he did.
Right.
Let me see how that works for me.
Yeah. And he got rich as a result, right? So yeah, we look, these guys were not perfect. That's clearly the point. So even though God is sort of bragging about Abraham, we know that Abraham wasn't perfect, right? We know that. You just have to go back and read the history, and you're like, oh, he wasn't perfect. So keeping the Torah doesn't mean that you have arrived and now you have angels singing around you all day long. Oh, and there's not a halo on your head because you have arrived. That's not the point. It's that the intent of your heart is to keep God's commandments. And that's clearly what Abraham did. And, it's so true that he had not written them down. Paul says that because of disobedience, the Torah was added. Now, a lot of people have had a heyday with that verse, but I really believe that what he's saying, and I just gave an example of this last Shabbat, that when you have kids, you don't tell the first one that comes along, now make sure not to hit your siblings. They're like, what siblings? I don't have any siblings, right? But then when they have a sibling and then they're playing and then you start hearing some screaming, you're like, what's going on? And little Johnny is hitting Susie. You're like, what are you doing, Johnny? Why are you hitting your sister? Because she took, whatever. And you say, no, we don't hit our little sister, right? And until then, they didn't know to not hit their little sister. But once you've told them, because of disobedience, now the law has been given, and now they're accountable for that. So even though you would hope that your kids would just be angels and they would never hit one another because they would just come out perfect, but we understand that's not generally the case, that there's things that were always part of God's values that he may not have specifically and explicitly stated, don't do this. But it was like, I've always been against that. Okay. For example, God has always been against bestiality. He was never okay with it. But we don't have any record of him giving that law until Sinai, right? But he was always against that. We know that he was always against murder, right? And it wasn't an issue until a certain, two brothers, Cain and Abel, you recall the story, that, he didn't have to say anything because it had never come up. But once that became an issue, then because of transgression, that's when God starts to give his law. He starts telling you, okay, I'm going to spell it out for you. Don't do this. And then he's like, you know what? I better write this thing down because they're going to forget. And so they're going to need something to go back to so that they can review these things because we always have a tendency to forget. Yeah, so Isaac blew it. And then we start seeing this this conflict that's going on between the herdsmen and filling up the wells. And what I appreciate about this is that, again, Isaac is the chosen one. God has come and said, I'm going to give all this to you. But then he's having trouble, right? The people in the land are not being nice to him, right? They're not treating him fairly. They're not treating him with respect. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know that I am God's anointed? Don't you get that? They're like, no, we don't. And we don't care. And what Isaac had to do was he had to keep pressing on. He had to push forward. He had to dig another well. Digging a well is a lot of work. I've done a few garden activities in my backyard, and digging holes is hard work. So, I would be really unhappy if I had dug a well and then somebody came and filled it in. I'd be like, what are you doing? Because it's a lot of work. But, that's just par for the course. We are going to have tribulation in this world. You can count on it. It's a promise that you will have tribulation. So even though we are chosen in the Lord, even though we are part of his family, we've been grafted in. Hallelujah. All those amazing blessings and promises that are ours, we're still going to have hard times in this world. And that's how God, helps us to grow up. So
if I could comment real quick on
Yeah.
that, Doug. One of the things that I really appreciate about what Isaac does, though, is he basically makes an investment in the land. That he realizes that this is his land, that this is the promise passed on to him by Abraham, given from God, and he's willing to invest in it. He puts in the work, he puts in the hard labor. It reminds me of when Israel came back into the land in the early part of the 20th century. And the investment that they made in the land and establishing the kibbutzim and draining the swamps up north and turning it from what Mark Twain saw in the 1800s into this lush, fertile, productive ground that it is today. And I think is a beautiful example of that. And as being grafted in, we need to have this sense, or we should have this sense of being invested, not just in the words, but in the people and in the land and in everything that is encompassed in the promise that God has given to Abraham, our father.
Well said. Yeah. So you mean we have to work and it doesn't just drop out of heaven automatically?
Well, maybe for most of us it does, but some of us has to work.
Some of us. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Well, let's keep going here. We got more to get to in this text. So here we are, and he says Rehovot. By the way, Rehovot means wide. Okay, so all these things kept happening, and now he's come to a wide land. This is where God made room for us. He made a broad area for us. So then he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. Then Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzat, one of his friends, and Pichol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you? But they said, we have certainly seen that the Lord is with you. So we said, let there be an oath between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, a brit, that you will do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have done nothing to you but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. Then they arose early in the morning and swore an oath with one another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. It came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, we have found water. So he called it Sheva. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took as wives Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemat, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. Wow. Well, it's kind of a happy ending there, that he gets sent away from Abimelech, and then he goes and God blesses him. And then what do you know? Abimelech seeks him out. Right? So what an important principle, that you've been struggling with your enemy. He keeps undoing what you're trying to do. So you're like, you know what? God bless you. I'm going to go my direction. You do what you're going to do. I'm going to do this thing over here, and I'm going to be diligent. I'm going to work hard. I know that God has blessed me already.
Mm-hmm.
And then his former, I mean, I don't know that they were enemies, but they were kind of, there was a conflict, obviously. So the former person that didn't like him so much, let's put it that way, then sought him out and said, hey, we can see that Yehovah is with you. Let's make a covenant so that you don't attack us, because now we can see that now you are the dominant one and we are the lesser. You're in the superior position and we're in the lesser position. So now we're trying to get a contract from you so that we're trying to hedge our bets. We're trying to make sure that we're protected because we're now afraid of you. Amazing how God turns that around, but there's always a cost. The cost is that we have to be faithful. The cost is that we have to walk in God's ways. If we're walking according to the ways of the world, we should not expect such good blessings. But Isaac, of course, learned. And of course, how old is Isaac by now, right? He has his kids when he's 60. Around this same time, his son's, at least his older son, is getting married. So he's probably pushing 80. I mean, he's getting up there, and just now he's really beginning to see this phenomenal blessing of the Lord. God sure likes to take his time, doesn't he? I mean, we all want to conquer the world by 33, like Alexander the Great. He conquered it earlier. He died at 33, excuse me. So there's a sense that, if you don't do it in your youth, then you're a loser. You haven't accomplished everything by the age of 26, then forget it. But that's part of the idolatry that we have in our American culture, where we worship the young. And look, I don't want to keep getting older. I'd love to stay 26, but you know what? That's of course an impossibility, and we just have to embrace where we are and what God has shown us. And so, you know what, God, it's okay, because this isn't the only thing that there is. And when you know that there's another life, a second life beyond this one, then you're like, okay, I'm cool with this. I'm chill. I don't have to become a multi-billionaire by whatever age, right? Because I have untold, unlimited riches that are waiting for me in the age to come.
I think too, as you get older, you appreciate each age that you come into, and you realize it's like, man, I would not want to go back and relive my 40s. I'm
Yeah.
really comfortable in the space that I am now. What really strikes me about this message or this passage that we just read, though, is how you get recognized that if you are faithful in your work, if you are faithful in doing just the simple work of what God has called you to do, if that's digging wells, if that's establishing your place in the land, if that is just plugging away every day, being faithful, being a good person, following after God, people begin to recognize that, and what people who were your enemies, people who you were crosswise with, will recognize, like, that guy has a peace about him. He has a contentment about him, and it doesn't mean you have to be super successful. It doesn't mean you have to be super rich. It just means that you will be recognized as someone who has been blessed, because blessings come in so many different ways. I tell you, there are so many people that are have money coming out their ears and things like that, that don't have peace, that don't have that can't trust people, that don't have assurance in their life, that just don't feel content, and to live a life of peace and contentment. Oh my gosh, what a blessing that is! It goes way beyond anything that money could buy, and powerful kings recognize it. It's like, what do you have? I want that. It's like, man, it's something that has to be earned, something that has to be following a faithful life. It just happens, and I think the people that you crossways in your life. I think that's especially important with kids. If kids go astray, but you continue to be faithful in your life,
Mm.
they'll recognize that and they'll say, "Man, I wish I had what mom and dad have." Well, you can, right?
Well said. Chapter 27. Now it came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered him, "Here I am." Then he said, "Behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now, therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau, his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, "Indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, 'Bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make savory food from them for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, and that he may bless you before his death.' And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, 'Look, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing.' But his mother said to him, 'Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice, and go get them for me.' And he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. And Rebekah took the choice clothes of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids on the goats, on his hands, and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she gave the savory food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went to his father and said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am. Who are you, my son?' Jacob said to his father, 'I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit, and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me.' But Isaac said to his son, 'How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?' And he said, 'Because the Lord your God brought it to me.' Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not.' So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, 'The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau.' And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. Then he said, 'Are you really my son Esau?' He said, 'I am.' He said, 'Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you.' So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, 'Come near now, and kiss me, my son.' And he came near and kissed him. And he smelled the smell of his clothing, and blessed him, and said, 'Surely the smell is of my son, is the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of the heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and of plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you.' Now it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out of the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also had made savory food and brought it to his father, and said to his father, 'Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me.' And his father Isaac said to him, 'Who are you?' So he said, 'I am your son, your firstborn, Esau.' Then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, 'Who? Who was the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed.' When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, 'Bless me also, O my father.' And he said, 'Your brother came with deceit, and has taken away your blessing.' And Esau said, 'Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing.' And he said, 'Have you not reserved a blessing for me? Then Isaac answered and said to Esau, indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What shall I do now for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of the heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass when you become reckless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. Let me do a little more here. And the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a few days until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Het. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Het, like these who are of the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? All right.
Well, there you have it.
That's a lot of stuff there, huh? Wow, talk about this is like a soap opera, you know. I mean, this is daytime TV, you know. Wow. But
so the first question I have, Doug, and I don't know if you've given this much thought, is do you think it was common knowledge in the household to Isaac and Rebekah that Esau had sold his birthright to Jacob for the stew?
I do. I really do. I don't think that it was easy to keep secrets back then. We know that there were a lot of servants around, you know, so things must have gotten through the grapevine. And chances are, you know, if Jacob is such a mama's boy and he's hanging out in the tent and he says, hey, guess what? You know, my brother just sold his birthright to me. What? What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's interesting that when Rebekah says, let the curse fall on me, in a sense it does, because she's never going to see her son ever again, right? So she does all this and she thinks that it's all going to turn out okay and you'll be back with me in, you know, a month or something like that. But no, he does not come back for some 20 years. Mm-hmm. And by then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe his mother has died. Yeah. So, you know, so she's bereaved of her son. He doesn't die at that moment, but she never sees him again. And, right. You know, that's really sad. And so the curse did go on her, which is really unfortunate. And also underscores the significance of these blessings, right? Once you say it, you can't undo it. That's huge.
Right. And so I think that's interesting. The guilt is upon Rebekah. So is Jacob just being obedient, or does he have some guilt to bear in this as well?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question.
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
There is a lot going on, and at the same time, Esau ultimately is responsible for giving up his birthright. So this is carried out right. The outcome is right. Sort of the means were a little bit sketchy, or maybe a lot sketchy.
Yeah, like a lot sketchy. Well, I think I think this is where, you know, we say, well, the end justifies the means, but no, it doesn't. Look, God will take care of the ends, but we are so convinced that we have to take care of the means, and, you know, whatever it takes to get there, it'll be okay because that's what was supposed to happen. That was my destiny. And I had to do these different things in order for this to happen. But that presupposes that God doesn't know how to make these things happen. Like he can give a prophecy and then doesn't know how to make it happen without people getting cheated, without people deceiving one another. I mean, it was clearly a huge emotional impact on Isaac. That was not a very nice thing to do. Jacob understood the significance of what he was doing. What if I do this and my father finds me out and then I'm cursed, right? I don't know, Mom, this sounds like a bad idea. This sounds like something that I really shouldn't be doing. I'm just, thinking of some of the sermons that I've heard over the years are like, well, Jacob was completely justified in doing what he did. And I'm like, I just don't think that's the case. It did work out, but again, with big scars. Okay. Yeah, it worked out, but with really big, painful scars. See, that's the decision that's before us. God will get us to the destination. But we have a say in how we get there. We can take the righteous path, or we can take the unrighteous path. He'll get us there, but you're going to be scarred and bruised and really hating life if you take the unrighteous path. And that's really the choice that Jacob made. And let's think about some of the consequences of what he did. What he did by deceiving his father, which was terrible. You should never deceive your father. But by doing that, he had to run away, never got to see his mother again. He was completely estranged from his brother. Even though they sort of made up years later, there was no more relationship to speak of. He himself got duped, right? He falls in love with Rachel, but he gets Leah, right? So now he has two wives, and these two wives are competing with one another. Then they're like, here, take my handmaid, Bilhah, right? And have children by her, right? And they're like, oh, I can do that too. So now he's got 4 wives. And then he's got these 12 sons, which is great. But that came at a cost, right? Because then he lost his wife, Rachel. We know that his sons really dishonored him at Shechem, where they went and killed everybody in Shechem. Of course, the whole thing with Dinah, that wasn't really cool either. Then, because of the jealousy that the brothers are feeling for this latter son that Jacob has from his beloved wife, then that son is then sold. And so all these years, right, Jacob is just right? And it all starts right here. It all starts by deceiving his father. Was it worth it? I don't think that was worth it. I think God could have worked it out a totally different way. And God would have written the Bible differently if Jacob had been righteous at that point. You see, we have it as it happened. But this was not written in stone. This was not like God's like, okay, I'm decreeing the future and this is how it has to happen. God can see the future. He can see the choices we make, but he doesn't direct us in those choices that we make. And it could have been a different story.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And at the same time, I can't imagine the pressure that Rebekah felt, that Jacob felt, in terms of, Isaac's getting on in years, and it's time to say the blessings. And there is no way that I'm going to let this happen to him. I mean, right before this, we read the verse about him taking the wives of the Hittites. And they were a grief to Isaac and Rebekah. They both hated him. They couldn't stand his wives. And it's like, and this guy's going to carry, right, the family name, the family heritage forward. It's like, I absolutely can't let this happen. And so what's so great about the Bible is it shows the frailty of the human condition to say,
Yeah.
it's a very real book. It's it's not a poly like everything's going to be fine and we're just going to go and we're always going to trust God. We always should. Yes, that's where we get to be able to preach these great sermons about how we should be, not how we are. And yet throughout history, we still behave the way we are. It's like it's such a hard lesson to learn because we're not God. We don't see God's tapestry until it's past, right?
Yep.
And it's just difficult. I'd like to say, oh man, I'd be strong and I'd trust God and I know that it's like, there's no way that he's going to take on this family. And it's like, well, I'd come up with a much worse solution.
Yeah, I hear you, brother. It's easy when we're just armchair quarterbacks, right? We're armchair theologians, and what if I had been there, I would have done this, right? I mean, I probably would have blown it just as bad. Yeah. But it's a great lesson because now we can learn from this and say, you know what? Thank you for the lesson. I don't want to go that path. And so I'm going to relax. I'm going to learn. And I'm sure, I already have made my own mistakes. But I don't need to keep making more, right? They still hurt every time I make a mistake. There's pain involved. That's the thing. There's pain, real pain involved. So these people were feeling the pain because of their choices. And, for all we know, if they had not deceived Isaac, I mean, a zillion things could have shown up. An angel could have shown up,
Right.
I mean, who knows, right? Esau could have gotten hit by a wild, a wild goat, I mean, a lightning strikes. I don't know, but something could have changed the outcome so that it may not have gone down this way. We just don't know those variables, but God does,
So, and kind of the way we started out, it was obvious that, or obvious, I don't know if everything's obvious to me when it comes to reading the Bible, but it appears that Isaac really understood that I've just got to be patient and wait for my wife to be able to get a child and get pregnant. I learned that lesson from Dad. I learned a lesson about she's my sister. I learned that lesson from Dad too, and we came out of that one. But this one, they really, I think, had to act on their own, or I think they felt like they had to act on their own. That they saw time running out, and the clock was ticking down, and consequences were going to be severe if they didn't do something. And it's so difficult to wait on God.
Yes, it is. That's waiting on the Lord. Well, let's get to 28. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham, to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham." So Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take himself away from there, and that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Padan Aram. Also Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalat, the daughter of Ishmael, Abram's son, the sister of Nebayot, to be his wife, in addition to the wives he had. All right. Well, we were talking about, did the word get around? Well, it most certainly did get around, right? The word got around, right? So, maybe he wasn't there with his ear to the tent, but whether it was the servants, whether the wind blew it his direction, he heard about what was said. And he took note. He's like, oh man, my wives are a real bummer to my parents. It seems like he starts to have this change of heart later on. And I think it's important that, God loves to redeem people. And we ultimately do not know the eternal fate of Esau. We know the earthly fate of Esau, but we do not know the eternal fate of Esau. And I think sometimes, at least as Christians in my kind of worldview growing up, that people are going to heaven or hell, and you kind of look at people in the Bible, you're like, well, he's going to hell, right? But we don't know that. We don't know ultimately what is going to become of Esau the man, and then the various people within the Esau camp. We know that God has some very interesting prophecies against Edom. He talks about that in Isaiah chapter 34 and many other places, right? So there is kind of this very much a vendetta that God has against the people, but against the man, we don't know. And so he seemed to have some kind of a change of heart, and that's good. That's always good.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the thing that I think is the most significant out of this passage as we wrap up this portion is the blessing that Isaac gives to Jacob, because this is the blessing that counts, right? This is the blessing of Abraham. This is the blessing of the heritage that will establish the Israel in the land of the promise. And when we talk about, did Jacob steal the blessing? Well, he got blessed, and he got a great blessing. Okay, these guys will serve you, and you'll be head over these guys, and all this other stuff. Which, for the period that you're alive, it's like, oh, that's great. Okay, but it doesn't last, because there's another generation after that. What does matter? And Jacob could have easily given this blessing to Esau, but he didn't. The blessing of Abraham. So he knew somewhere in his heart of hearts that Jacob was the one that should carry on the heritage, the blessing that God gave to Abraham, his father, passed on to Isaac, and then now to Jacob. And we're still talking about this blessing today. We still have this land today. We still have this people today. We still have this language today. And this is an absolutely amazing blessing that will continue until the Messiah comes, right? So this is, in essence, the blessing to have. And I think the blessing that Paul talks about, that, when he says, are we Abraham's seed? It's a blessing of being grafted in. It's a blessing of being of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Well said, brother. Well said. A few questions here. Shemin asks, what does eating well have to do with being able to pronounce his blessing over his son? I think you can just think better when you're full, So I think, the text says that Isaac was getting old. He's like, hey, bring me some food, then I'll bless you, And I think he's just like, when my stomach is satisfied and I've had that delicious meat that you make, then I'll bless you, right? I think that's just the idea. And that, who knows, this could be my last, for all you know, it could be my last meal. Do this nice thing for me, and then I'm going to bless you. So I don't think it was contingent upon that, but I think that was sort of, this is the last thing that you can do for me, your father, before I bless you. After that, when you got the blessing, you're free to go. You're your own man at that point. And, so just do that nice thing for your dad.
I think of it when we sit down to meals, right? We sit down, we enjoy a meal, and then it's like, oh, let's make a toast. It's essentially a blessing, right? It's like, to so and so may they. I think of a wedding blessing or a wedding toast, and you're essentially blessing the bride and groom, but it's done after the meal. and it's like, oh, this is great, and something about being satiated and full, and you're happy, and you're. It's like, oh, I'm ready to bless. And it's like, I don't need anything. I'm ready to give.
That's a good word. Yeah, that's a really good word. Somebody asked, what does Be'er Lahai Roi mean? So Be'er is as the well. Lachai is your cheek, your lechi, lachai. And then Roi is pastor, shepherd. So the well of the cheek of the shepherd. I'm not quite sure how that has significance, but that's what it means. So, yeah. All right. Next question. This is from Snow Beach. I thought the blessing would be at least part of the birthright. Well, yeah, I think it is. That basically, nowadays we have a will and testament, right? And so whoever has the birthright gets to receive the blessing. So, he didn't write it out. This is my last will and testament. I leave everything I have to the one who has the birthright. So that's what essentially he was doing. He did not write it down. There was no document that says this is my will, but he was speaking that document, if you will, over his son. And so that's why the firstborn received that the inheritance. So, all right, let's see. Here is a question from Shemin. The well of life is to shepherd. Okay, awesome. Good job, Shemin. All right, this is from James 1:12. In essence, didn't Rebekah tempt her son and he succumbed to that temptation? That's how I see it. That's how I see it. I think he did. I think she did tempt her son. I don't think it was right, even though it all sort of worked out in the end, but with many bruises and cuts and scrapes and scars, and yeah, I mean, God's like, well, okay. I think there's the easy way and there's the hard way. God's like, we can do it the easy way. If you want, we can do it the hard way. It's up to you, but I got the easy way right here. And we're like, oh no, that's not even never going to happen, because I can't even trust that that's going to happen. So I'm going to take the hard way, and you end up at that same place. God's like, oh, hey, there he was waiting for you. You're like, oh, you've been here the whole time. And I told you we could have gone the easy way. Oh,
I think that Jacob definitely got the idea from his mom. She planted that seed, but he was certainly complicit. He had numerous opportunities to not only to opt out, but to come clean before his dad. It's like, hey, wait a minute, aren't you, I hear your voice. Well, Dad, yeah, Mom made me do this. He never did. And at that point in time, he became as much an active partner with Rebekah. And so I don't, succumbed means he didn't really have much choice to me. I think he made his own choices in the overall thing.
Which is a great point about temptation, Gary, right? We may be tempted. It might be the devil tempting us to do something. It might be that coworker tempting us, or a TV show, or whatever it is that's tempting us to do something. But ultimately, we own it. We make the choice to do it. Regardless of the temptation, we made the choice. So even though his mother was tempting him, Jacob made that his choice. That became his decision. And it's a good word for us to remember, that we don't want to do that stuff. So there's one more question about Jacob and the angel. We're going to save that question until the next portion. We will get there. I promise you, we will definitely get there. But we're already over time. We're trying to keep this about an hour. That's so hard to do. But that's kind of our goal, is keep it around an hour. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. Man, stay in the Word, live the Word, keep God's commandments. They're good. They're really good. God has our very best at heart. He wants the very best for us. He wants to give us great things. And if we'll follow him, there'll be far fewer scars. Maybe none, but none of us is perfectly. That's an idea. It's worth a shot.
Let's do it. Yes, absolutely.
All right.